is Wally, and I'm going to be starting off our presentation with our project title, which is a human-centric approach to evaluating the AI mental health app landscape. Next slide, please. So first, I just want to introduce the rest of my team, which includes myself as well as Eddie, Sophia, Uma, and Ashu. We also want to thank our two mentors, Asian and Laura, for their support and guidance over the last 12 weeks. Next slide, please.
So, why did we choose this topic? Currently, the US is in a severe mental health crisis. It's increasing every year. And alongside this, we have a rapid proliferation of AI mental health chatbots, bringing in millions of users. And while these services hold a lot of potential to make positive impact, there comes a concern of how we can ensure they're not taking advantage of an especially vulnerable population. And in this ever-changing climate of development, we must find a way to keep users protected and hold these businesses accountable. Next slide, please.
So following up on that reasoning, AI and mental health is an expanding industry as a result of a shortage of psychotherapists. Additionally, many of these tools are appealing to those who cannot access or afford a human therapist. And in the market today, there's actually over 41 of these tools commercially available, each with a unique approach to AI-assisted mental health care, which is a good thing, but it's very easy for users to get fatigued and overwhelmed in the process of choosing the right app. And for the user, this adds like another barrier to getting the help they need. Next slide, please. This leads into our mission, which is to transform mental health support through ethically designed human-centric AI innovations, ensuring compassionate and equitable care for all humans. Next slide, please.
So here we have a brief overview of how we came upon this mission after we chose the topic. We took existing frameworks and turned the focus to users with our own. And then we applied it to a tool to help guide and inform consumers. And we're going to delve more into this process throughout the presentation. Next slide, please.
So before we get into the rest of our project, I want to give some context. Next slide, please. I'm just going to briefly explain a few of the milestones in therapeutic chatbot development. So it all started with Eliza in 1966, which was actually one of the first chatbots created. And it's more well known for its use as a Rogerian psychotherapist. The initial design is simple, but it's significant because it demonstrated potential in the field of AI for therapy, specifically the crucial aspect of mental health care, which is a non-judgmental listener. This was followed by Perry in 1972, and Perry could simulate a person with schizophrenia, which opened the door for AI to be able to simulate different mental health conditions. And then moving through the 2000s and 2010s, we see chatbots being used and shared more frequently on the internet, as well as the emergence of the first commercially available therapy chatbots. And then as we get into the current timeline, more sophisticated algorithms lead to responses with more nuance and empathy, and ones that can pick up human emotional cues, which is an aspect of many of the chatbots in the market today. Next slide, please.
So now let's look into the regulatory landscape. Currently, we have no existing federal legislation directly governing these chatbots, specifically data privacy. So instead, we have these services regulated by a combination of federal laws, other federal laws, as well as state laws. Next slide, please. And this map here illustrates the status of state laws concerning AI data privacy. And as we can see here, we have quite a way to go. Next slide, please. So aside from this, here are the three main federal approaches that fill in these absences. First, we have the FDA overseeing digital health technologies. However, their focus is on medical devices, and this raises a question of what exactly qualifies as such and how do we track that? So while they have been developing new frameworks targeted for AI, these constant changes in the sector make it very difficult to regulate. And next we have HIPAA, which oversees privacy and security for patient health information. And while a majority of these apps comply with the regulations, HIPAA only applies to healthcare providers. So similar to our issue with the FDA, these chatbots may not be seen as such. And lastly, we have the FTC, which works to prevent deceptive and unfair business practices. And they've expressed interest in the ethical marketing of AI. However, once again, we face this issue of how to monitor and police all that is out there. So, considering all of these limitations and the uncertainty of when they will be improved, our purpose here is to protect and inform users of these risks. Next slide, please. With all that considered, let's look into the general ethical concerns regarding these chatbots. Next slide, please. So data privacy and security. We just covered the deficits in regulations for this, and I'd like you to ask yourself how often you skip over or maybe not see the privacy policy of a website you're on. Listed here is just some examples of what is exactly at risk here. Going into the full extent would keep us here for quite some time. So to be brief, the data in question is especially sensitive considering the purpose in this sector, and we currently lack strict governance on its protection. Next slide, please. So prime example of these risks is the case against BetterHelp, who were found to be giving user information to advertisers. And this just emphasizes the concern about the potential for misuse of data with users who trust these platforms with deeply personal information. Next slide, please. Our next conflict is addictive codependency. There's a risk of users becoming overly dependent on these tools. The convenience in desperate situations can lead to a discouragement to seek social support, which possesses qualities a chatbot cannot replicate. And this can then lead to excessive engagement, where the user's only coping mechanism is to reach out to the chatbot. Next slide, please. And lastly, the quality of advice poses severe risks. The way these chatbots are trained tend to have more general responses, which can be oversimplistic or misaligned with the user's problems, and may not be able to fully grasp the context, which can lead to misinterpretation and the recommendation of harmful strategies, which has happened quite a lot. And this may lead to severe consequences, as well as the user resenting seeking support for their problems. Next slide, please. And one of the most well-known cases is the controversy with the Nita chatbot Tessa, who was found to be providing dangerous advice to users seeking support for eating disorders, such as suggesting they count their calories, watch what they eat, constantly weigh themselves, and users expressed outrage given that this advice is encouraging them to feed back into their disorder. And it's clear here that there's a big issue. People in troubling states are extremely vulnerable to this wide variety of risks, and they may not even know it. Next slide, please.
So that brings us to the next section. And so with the growing number of ethical concerns surrounding mental health apps, we became curious about what solutions, if any, have been proposed to address some of these challenges. And one of the more notable solutions we've come across is the Readiness for AI Deployment and Implementation framework from Stanford's Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. We also reviewed various documents concerning the ethics of the mental health practice, and while they don't specifically address mental health apps, we felt them important in our analysis. From this review, we realized that many proposed solutions are developer-driven, which, especially due to the lack of regulation, means it's up to the developers whether to implement these guidelines or not. Lacking was a guide or tool designed to help a person better navigate the vast field of mental health apps themselves and find one that fits their needs. So we identified a set of common themes and principles to guide our creation of a criteria and set of questions that a user could use to evaluate these apps. And here are the categories we focused on based on the review of the previous frameworks. They're fairly straightforward, but I'd like to give you a brief explanation for each one for you to better understand our approach. For privacy, we look at whether the app clearly explains how it uses and shares your data. Additionally, we examine how the app safeguards your personal health information. When it comes to effectiveness, we verify whether the app provides evidence to support its claims of improving mental health. This could be in the form of clinical studies, peer-reviewed research, or even user feedback. Safety is another important area. Here we ask whether the app includes features to prevent harmful behavior, especially in a crisis situation. We also check if the app offers easy ways for users to get help or report problems. Transparency is pretty much what it sounds like. Essentially, the more information the app provides and the easier it is to access, the better. For example, one question that we ask is whether the app explains what it can and cannot do. And since we're talking about AI-based apps, it's also important that they explain how the AI component of their app works. Engagement examines whether the app can maintain a user's attention long enough for them to see results or benefits without becoming overly dependent on the app. And we look for features that help users stay on track, but also highlight any that may grab a user's attention a little too much. Finally, equity ensures the app is accessible to everyone. Among other factors, we consider features like the languages available and whether the app is designed with considerations for people with disabilities in mind. By using these categories as a framework, we aim to create a tool to empower users to make informed decisions when choosing a mental health app. And here's just a quick look at our initial set of questions.
So following up on that criteria that Eddie just explained, we decided to use that to evaluate the 10 leading apps in AI therapy. I won't go into detail on the specifics, but we just decided to look into this current market to better understand how this world works, how these apps measure up to our framework, and most importantly, if they are human-centric or not. Next slide, please. So from applying our framework to our research, I'm just going to go over some of the key findings we discovered when evaluating these apps. So during this process, we were trying to step into the shoes of someone looking to figure out what mental health therapy app they want to use. But we realized that applying our framework manually was very time-consuming and tedious, that it was difficult to locate information, and overall that it was unrealistic for a user to do all this work themselves. And below is a screenshot of our data collection matrix, and you can just see how tedious this work is. Next slide, please.
With any framework, there is a trade-off between thoroughness and usability. So with that in mind, we thought really hard about the best way to make our framework interactive and easy to engage with for the user without subjecting them to the overwhelming amount of detail that they might need to make an accurate assessment. So that leads to our tool, a custom GPT ethical advisor. Next slide, please. Many of us in this call might have heard of ChatGPT, but there's actually a lesser known functionality of the same product called Custom GPT, where you're able to customize a GPT to fulfill whatever more specific purpose you might have. For us, that purpose was to make our framework interactive and simple to leverage for users looking to assess an AI mental health platform. We chose Custom GPT to execute this for a variety of reasons, namely that it is highly customizable. There's an instructions section circled here on the left where you can go as in-depth as necessary, and we'll go more into what our instructions look like in a second. Other reasons we chose it, you can form your own limited knowledge base of curated documents, which we liked because we were able to manually upload privacy policies and other relevant documents of the top platforms which we were evaluating. Internet access is also available and can be restricted as necessary. We mainly use the internet access to pull up-to-date user reviews of the platforms from various app stores. And most importantly, our overall product is free to users. Anyone with a link can access our tool, and we'll put up a QR code later for all of you to try it out as well. And I just sent one in the chat also. Next slide, please. Our mission here was to turn our extremely thorough, in-depth framework into instructions for this GPT, and we kept R42's pillar of human centricity at the core of all of this. We explicitly requested concise, clear, and empathetic responses, made sure to assume little to no knowledge on the subject from users, and encouraged them to ask questions. We fed in highly specific instructions for all 6 parameters of our framework, but in a way that's abstracted from users, so they're able to go as in-depth as they have the time and capacity for. Users never have to directly interact with the components of our framework unless they specifically ask for them or want to, but they're able to reap all the benefits of it. Next slide.
So I'm just going to go through this quickly since we're running out of time, I think. But this is a demo of our advisor. And here we're just stepping into the shoes of someone maybe dealing with anxiety and they're looking for help. What kind of apps would help with that? So they ask, for help with anxiety apps, and also if there's any personal information needed for these recommendations. You see, you get a list of apps that have features specifically targeted towards anxiety, and at the bottom, you'll notice that states there's no personal information needed, as it doesn't collect that or doesn't want to collect that. Next, we follow up with a bit of a question concerning privacy and data, as this user is concerned about that particularly and wants to know which app handles privacy the best. So it reviews the information and based on that makes a recommendation on based on which app handles data the best. And it also highlights or summarizes how the others do in that same field. And importantly also is to know whether the app actually works or not. So the next question asked is about safety and effectiveness. Do they actually work? It reviews the methods of treatment that these apps have and whether they're peer-reviewed, clinically researched, or if they lack it. You'll notice for number 4, it mentions it doesn't have the same level of clinical backing as the first option. Gives you a little summary at the end. And finally, gotta be polite and thank the advisor. So that's the quick demo.
Great. Thank you, Eddie, for taking us through the demo. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashu, and I will be talking about our framework testing and goals next. Our benchmark testing actually shows that the mental health advisor, it outperforms competitors like Gemini and Raw GPT in 3 critical areas, as you can see from the screenshots here as well. First, our framework excels at delivering concise and goal-specific recommendations to the users. Secondly, we actually built, as we learned earlier today, that our framework is built with a strong foundation in ethics. It was actually trained on apps in the mental health space. And it can address questions very easily, questions around confidentiality and so forth. And it is through the training that we ensure that these responses are effective and actually simple to understand for the users. So finally, as a result of this, we can see that the framework actually helps keep the users engaged and focused on their mental health journey. Unlike other platforms that provide a lot more generic advice, and it's almost like a Google search information that you could just retrieve widely. Now, as we've shared, data privacy, security, and human centricity was at the core of our mission. We incorporated privacy protocols into the training process of all the apps to ensure that user questions with respect to data privacy, confidentiality, and data security for those apps are handled. And it ultimately helps build user trust. Thank you, Zishwan. And it is this focus which actually differentiates the framework in a field where such concerns are actually overlooked. So now let's look ahead and see what's out there for us as far as the future state goes. We could scale our framework to broader space in both US and international markets. We could actually expand the foundation of this of the framework from human centricity to other principles like explainability and transparency. And then third is our North Star. I would like to call out that we are very passionate about the mental healthcare space in general. This was a reason why we chose this topic as a focus for our cohort group through intensive research and discovery. We know that there is a unique opportunity in this space, and there are already biases that exist in the current ecosystem because mental health care is not accessible to all. So one of the use cases we could look to for extension in the future is partnering with other mental health app providers so we could actually broaden access to mental health care. Lastly, let's take a look at the QR code for our app. You can actually open your cameras and start chatting live with our mental health advisor today. And finally, I would love to share a thank you note to the R42 group and to you all for listening to us today. This was an exciting initiative. We have actually posted our contact information, LinkedIn's, and emails should you like to discuss with us further. We do have a white paper that we published in addition to the content that you saw today, and it will be available through the R42 group should you like to dive deeper as well. So thank you very much, and we can turn it over to Q&A next.
Perfect. Excellent timing. Let's see. Let's see, anyone want to put their hands up? I've got a couple of questions. Right, so the question about no, it's been trained on these mental health apps and he's given an opinion on each one. What if one of the manufacturers of those apps disagrees? Could they disagree? I mean, how do we know that one's more private than the other? Is because of literature reviews and things like that, or is there something fundamentally that the debate? One of the manufacturers might not like our little answer for about them, for example.
Hi, Ranjan, I can take this one. So, fortunately, most of the information that we trained our like tool on, it comes directly from the people putting out the app. So we trained it on the privacy policy that they released. We trained it on their about page from their website. So any conclusions that we draw are a direct consequence of how they present their own product. So hopefully they wouldn't disagree too much with us. Although we do try and be objective, and that is the whole purpose of, I guess, pitting the apps against each other.
Okay, great. Shiva's got a question.
Yeah, so I've studied a few privacy acts, and it seems like, some are stricter than the others. So I know GDPR is very strict. I think the Singapore one is very strict. So I'm just curious as to how many privacy acts have you actually covered? I saw that chart, I think one of your team members presented with all the different circles, right? On the top left was privacy. So just curious. Is this broad coverage across all the strictest acts? And then do you also keep up with the changes in the acts, because the acts keep changing? Australia just tightened theirs, India just tightened theirs, and so on.
Sophia, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so definitely one of our considerations was to look more on the international stage. Because I will say definitely other countries, especially in Europe, do have a lot stricter policies. However, I think what we really wanted to highlight was the deficits in the US policies on this, because that's definitely a very severe issue going on.
Yeah. And just to add to that, the training that we've given, I think what you're bringing up is an excellent point with respect to the potential that, in addition to the privacy policies that we examine of the mental health apps that we trained our framework on, there's an additional layer of just general regulatory lens that could be embedded on top of the framework. So that's a great point. I think that would be a great next step as well to pursue as we continue to scale the framework for additional apps and across legal dimensions as well.
Yeah, and if I may, just an additional point, right? I'm not a lawyer, but let's say there's let's say a European person working on a work permit in the US and they're trying the app, and then so jurisdiction also may play a role, right? Like, you're looking at US to Sophia's point, but let's say they try the app and they go back and then they say, hey, no, that violated some of the laws. So just something to think about.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's very interesting to think about. I'm not sure if it's that where the app was developed is the factor here that would kind of support it in a legal case versus whether or not the user's from the United States. But that is a great point. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, let's see. So can people actually use this? What level is it? So is it ready to give out for sort of beta testing yet?
Yes, actually, we have posted it or published it on ChatGPT itself, so that they're the ones who kind of host our product. So if you click the link that we sent or scan the QR code, anyone can try it out right now.
Oh,
And
yeah, I see
yeah,
that. Yeah.
sorry.
And then, I have a question. So it doesn't cost you anything, it doesn't cost us anything to ChatGPT doesn't charge us, or do they charge us the $20 a month, or they don't charge
Just
us
the
anything?
$20 a month, and for the GPT builder, pretty much. But that's included in the pro, in the account. Yeah.
Great. So it's in a main account, but let's say 1 million people use it. They don't charge the 2 cents or whatever it is per access for the API. Okay, that's interesting. let's see. Tell us a bit about the journey you took to get to this result and how you landed on this idea and came across and did an implementation, versus a framework. I think you were thinking about a framework beforehand. Tell us a little bit about the journey.
I can take this one. So we started out just kind of observing how many products there were in the mental health space and getting kind of overwhelmed ourselves, not being able to differentiate them from each other. And this was like 2 or 3 weeks into research. And so when we tried to build our own framework, we noticed that many of them were built for the developers of the apps themselves so that they could evaluate their own product against some ethical standards. But from the user's perspective, there's a lot of information that the developers have that we might not have access to. So it's kind of hard to make decisions along the same lines that the developers are. So our original intention was to flip the framework and make it user-focused and human-centric in that way. So once we did that, I started evaluating all of the apps against the framework, and it was such a long, lengthy, and tedious process that we started experimenting with if there were ways to speed it up. And that's where we kind of found out that ChatGPT was pretty good at reading through privacy policies and pulling the details. And if we asked it questions, it could differentiate one privacy policy from another. And so we wondered if there was a way to kind of combine that functionality and present it to users in a way where they don't have to think as hard as we did.
Got it. Got it. Excellent. Excellent. All right, let's see. Any other questions? Let's see. Have we got here? No hands up raised. Okay, so ethics. We have no questions raised, and I see that people talk about ethics a lot, and a lot of academics talk about ethics. But what do you think? Are companies interested in ethics at all? I don't see many jobs for ethics. AI ethics specialist, or maybe that's just me. What do you think? Or do you think that's the case? And do you think that's going to change, or really people just want to ship products and let the marketplace decide?
Personally, I hope it changes. I'm trying to build a career in that space, but Ashu is a professional right now. She mentioned if you want to expand on that. She mentioned
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, Ranjan. It's a matter of, it's a few things. One, it's a matter of being able to demonstrate, like we have done today, that there is certainly an intersection of ethics with any products or capabilities that we can launch in artificial intelligence. So to be able to demonstrate that it can be done, it can be built. I think second, as Sophia had mentioned in the slides as well earlier on, that there are companies getting in trouble for not following or sort of overextending their reach with respect to either not informing the users or just providing incorrect information to them. So sometimes we learn based on the mistakes we make, and that's when it becomes the norm, and that's why we have laws. Especially in my case, we have in the fintech space, it's highly regulated. So I think, and the third, I think, is just as we make more progress in AI or technology in general, and it becomes more prevalent, I think this is something where companies and product owners and builders and so forth will place focus on integrating ethics as part of the rules, the models, etc., that they build. So there is definitely a potential and definitely a market where where this will kind of co-inhabitate with each other. So we will be hearing more about this
We
in
will
the
be
near
here.
future.
Yes.
Yes.
It's all right. I think we got time for